Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Today is Thursday, May 7th, 2026. Spring has finally sprung in here in Calgary. Tax season is over, thankfully, and that means an opportunity to get back to sharing some great ideas and conversations. Today, I'm happy to welcome John Bradley from Fidelity Investments, who is joining us for what I think is going to be a great chat about the AI landscape. John brings a very interesting background to us today, which reflects a unique blend of science, technology, and business experience. He holds a degree in genetics from Western University, a computer science degree from Toronto Metropolitan University, an MBA from the University of Toronto, and last but not least, a Master of Laws in Innovation and Technology from the University of Toronto Law School. In his role as a director of emerging technologies at Fidelity, John leads a consulting-style team focusing on identifying and driving adoption of innovative technologies across the organization. The team work centers on three key areas: automation, artificial intelligence, and emerging technology research. So welcome, John. I know you have some great ideas to share, so let's just jump right into it.
Great. Yeah. Thank you for having me, Conrad. It's a pleasure to be here and to talk about all things AI and technology and what the future may hold. So I'm happy to jump right into it. Just to kind of set the scene in terms of my role within Fidelity, like you'd mentioned, I lead a consulting style team that's really looking to identify the latest and greatest technology and figure out where it fits within the landscape, both to benefit our internal stakeholders as well as our external customers. So I think it's going to be a great chat and ready to get started. And I think, one of the best places to start is really talking about how, AI became so prevalent as it is today. And, it seems like it's inescapable in terms of every day when you wake up, somebody's mentioning AI, whether it's in the news or at home. And people seem to think that it's kind of just been a mainstay for a long time, but it really kind of exploded onto the scene not that long ago. So it's there's a bit of a history lesson to be had here, but I call it the AI Big Bang, and it really happened around late 2022. And that's when ChatGPT hit the scene, and it set an astounding record in terms of the fastest app to actually reach 100 million active users on a monthly basis. And so this was dramatically faster than all of the other apps that came before it. And some of those apps are actually, still mainstays today, things like TikTok, things like Instagram. So it just kind of leapt over all of those and became this massive tool that everybody was interested in exploring. And that really kicked off the interest in AI that kind of made it, common knowledge today. And one of the reasons for that is just kind of the media attention that it was given. People started to hear about this AI and ChatGPT and how interesting and valuable the responses were. They went out and actually tested it out, and they said, hey, this is great. I can use it to kind of generate information if I'm looking for a recipe or information about a topic. But maybe there's other things I can do. And from there, it's only kind of grown in terms of interest and exposure.
Great. Well, that's pretty amazing. And we have to think of Instagram, and these are some very, TikTok, these are some very, very major apps that really do shape the online world as we know it. And to see, obviously ChatGPT be the fastest up to get to that figure, is really quite amazing. From what I understand you're saying there is you really see that speed of adoption had a few, number one, it was because it was useful. Yeah. And number two, because it did gather a lot of attention. Is there any other reasons you sort of saw that rapid rise? Like, why did it have so much more traction than say that Instagram or TikTok?
Yeah, I think one of the other main reasons in terms of why they saw, why people were so interested in testing it out and it saw that rapid adoption was just its ease of use. So, AI as a concept and as a set of tools has been around for a long time, but historically there was a large barrier to entry. You had to have a master's or PhD in either computer science, physics, or, advanced maths. Now you can unlock the power of AI just by, typing out a set of instructions. Hey, I want to know more information about what's going on in the world, and I want it summarized in a particular way, and it's able to output that information to you in an easy and straightforward manner. So just the ease of use and the actual power of generating, high quality responses, I think that was one of the main drivers And it's seeing the adoption rate kind of skyrocket versus previous tools that didn't have that kind of user experience.
Right. Well, that's sort of has sparked what we like to sort of call an AI gold rush. Now, you could share some perspectives on that, and how you're seeing the technology shape, both some of the and how you start to see it sort of come into the mainstream culture and mainstream products overall.
Totally, yeah. So, in terms of the way I like to talk about the history of AI, there was the Big Bang where, ChatGPT hit the scene, everybody tried it out and then saw the value and then started to kind of use it more and more on a daily basis. And then it kind of transitions into this AI gold rush where all of the vendors that we, know and use every day saw the popularity of ChatGPT while they were sitting on the sidelines and said, hey, maybe there's an opportunity for us to kind of get in on the AI action. And so they started to work on their own AI products and try to incorporate AI into the solutions and services that they provide. And so you saw AI features and functions kind of exploding everywhere. Some places it made sense, Microsoft Copilot, having an AI tool to help you with your administrative and work-related tasks, that totally makes sense. But you were starting to see AI kind of popping up in other areas where, maybe the value was a little bit more questionable. I went to the Consumer Electronics Show this year, and they were talking about AI-powered showers, AI-powered cat food dispensers. And, it's in those areas where it's like, it's a bit more uncertain whether you really need AI to help you feed your cat or to control the temperature of your shower. But, my best guess is that, all of these companies are seeing, excuse me, the money being made by OpenAI, and they're trying to cash in on that as well. Whether, that is actually ends up being the case still remains to be seen, but, everybody's trying, it feels like.
Right. Yeah, so you mentioned you were at the Consumer Electronics Show, and I mean, you're taking a big view of everything, AI is from everything controlling the temperature of your shower to feeding your cat to providing shortcuts in your administrative workload at work through Microsoft Copilot. How would you, as someone who's deep into the field, how would you really distinguish a meaningful AI breakthrough and sort of real world application from really what is just sort of a marketing hype or a sort of Me Tooism?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the best way to differentiate between, what is AI for AI's sake and where AI is actually creating value is starting with a problem statement, and then looking at it to say, is AI actually going to solve this problem, or is it just going to, complicate it or just add a layer of complexity where it isn't required? So I think when we're thinking about AI, a lot of people think of it as a singular thing, but in actuality, it's a set of tools that are designed to solve particular problems. So in trying to figure out, is AI going to add value here or not, the best thing that you can do is try to understand those different AI tools and what are their strengths versus their weaknesses. And then you can assess it against, a series of different scenarios and say, okay, well, if I have an AI tool that is helping me generate content, like ChatGPT does, is it really going to add value to controlling my shower or to, helping me feed my cat? Probably not. So if they're talking about, the vendor's talking about, hey, we have ChatGPT for, for pets or ChatGPT for your shower, it's hard to see how, the strengths of an AI tool is really going to add value there. But if you're talking about having to summarize emails, coordinate your calendar, and AI, one of its strengths is being able to ingest information and to condense it and to generate new information, that's more likely to have value there. So it's really about understanding, it doesn't have to be at a deep technical level, but having an awareness of what are the strengths of AI and is it really going to benefit applying it to that situation? And it certainly will in some cases, but in the others, like we were talking about, the shower or the cat food, probably not.
Right, right. Well, I mean, and I guess, silly applications like that, like the shower and the cat food. I mean, I think we can look at that problem statement and say, like, look, like a feeder with a timer,
Yeah,
probably even analog 1950s technology would probably do the job.
exactly.
And if that, of course, does lead to, you get some headlines and you start to see some skepticism around the technology because, I mean, first of all, it's new. It is
Yeah,
also, in a lot of cases, if you've lived long enough, you've seen, pretty wild claims
yeah,
over many years from various different supposed revolutionary
yeah,
technologies.
yeah,
Maybe just you might as well just address the elephant in the room. So let's just talk about AI skepticism
sure.
and really, what sort of perspectives can you share on that, or around AI skepticism, and again,
Yeah.
sort of drilling down on that and just touching on those points.
Yeah, totally. I think, having a healthy skepticism is generally speaking a good thing. And as it relates to AI, there's definitely healthy skepticism out there in the marketplace. And I would say, the AI vendors and the vendors we use every day haven't really helped themselves because, as you mentioned, there's a lot of hype that's there in the media. There's been this push to try and integrate AI into everything, whether it needs to be there or not. So that's created this environment where, every day you wake up, there's AI is going to change how we live, how we work, how we do everything. But when people are actually, interacting with the tools themselves, they're not seeing the value that's being spoken about. And so there's a lot of skepticism that builds up because of that. And so there was a recent study done by MIT that claimed 95% of AI investment in AI trials generated zero return or zero value.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that actually comes from the fact that, yeah, there is all of this hype, but there isn't a lot of direction when exploring, and there isn't a lot of doing what we were just talking about, understanding the tools even at a kind of a high level and trying to apply them where they make the most sense. A lot of people are trying to just use AI for AI's sake, and the chances of success when taking that approach generally are much lower than if you were to say, hey, here's the strength of this AI tool. I have a particular use case that this would be a good fit. Let's start to explore there and see how we can kind of implement this on a solid go forward basis.
Right. So you're sort of seeing a lot of the skepticism as a result of a little bit of the silliness, but also just
Yeah.
be the gap between understanding and application and
Yeah.
and such. And really, I mean, would you also say that perhaps this is relates to Amara's law, which says, look, like tech is always you're always gonna you always overestimate the impact in the short term, but you underestimate the impact in the long term. Would you say that also has that idea might have some application here?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I think because, that's 100% right. Where, when you talk to vendors, when you see things in the news, there's this assumption that it's just going to be very easy to implement. Excuse me, but the reality is kind of far from the truth. So in order to have success, with any type of technology adoption, you need several things to go on. You need people to want to be able to adopt this technology. They have to understand it. So there's a certain level of training required. There also has to be support on an ongoing basis. And a lot of times, early on, when trying to adopt things like AI, that isn't there. There is this assumption that it's going to be easier than it actually is for the various reasons just discussed. So the early adoption doesn't go as well as people hope for. But as these tools stick around and people get more comfortable with them, it starts to unlock more longer term value because people get familiar with best practices and really being able to figure out, okay, this tool is going to be great for this job. So the longer term value starts to kind of pick up. But there's definitely that gap where there's kind of expectations versus reality. And that definitely leads to disappointment and skepticism early on.
Right. I want to cue off something you said earlier as well here, just John, just about the fact that that AI is not a monolith, right? It's
Yeah,
a set of tools that you described, just like having your tool chest, which has a hammer, screwdriver, power drill,
yeah,
etc. So I wonder if you maybe expand on that a little bit about sort of looking at, because when you see a lot of the doomer ideas that
yeah,
look like AI is going to decide that the
right,
best thing, the most optimal use of resources is to
right,
generate paper clips, and it's going
yeah,
to turn the whole world into paper clips.
right,
And really sort of that sort of, or that that's if we harken back to the Terminator Skynet, there sort of seems that there's assumption that AI is a sort of monolithic
yeah,
thing. or really what you're talking about is a toolkit. Could you maybe expand on that a bit and really just sort of drill down on really what it is?
Yeah, absolutely. So, sorry, one second.
Not at all.
Yeah, so that's one of the most, I think, common misconceptions about artificial intelligence is that it is this singular thing that has the ability to solve every problem in the world, much like Skynet. But the reality is that artificial intelligence is really just an umbrella term that is used to describe various types of tools that are looking to replicate human-like intelligence, but in very narrow ways. And so one of the best analogies I've found for trying to describe that or draw a parallel is saying artificial intelligence is similar to saying power tools. So if you walked into Canadian Tire or Home Depot and you said, "Hey, I have a weekend project. I'm trying to build a shed. I want to use power tools." The people at the hardware desk would probably say, "Well, that's great, but what do you need to do to build this shed? Do you need to drill something? Do you need to cut something? Do you need to sand something?" And depending on what you're looking to do, the person at the hardware desk can point you in the right direction of the category of tools that you're looking for. So saying artificial intelligence is very similar. So it's an umbrella term that describes these pieces of software that replicate human-like intelligence. And so each one of these types of AI tools is going to have a strength and a weakness. And then once you start to understand those strengths and weaknesses, you're better suited to pick the right tool for the job and really get the value out of AI that maybe somebody who wasn't taking that approach wouldn't end up getting.
Right. So that's very interesting. So the idea, look, it's a group of tools that share some relationship, but they're not a single monolith. You're not creating a single thing that's going to have the sort of a universal application tool, right?
Right. Yeah,
right.
Exactly. So you still need, the contractor to go pick up all the appropriate tools in order to build the shed, or if you want to do that. So you still need somebody to pick the right tool and then pick the sequence and put all of those things together. Those tools, if you just lay them in your backyard with all of the appropriate supplies, they're not going to build the the shed by themselves. You have to actually go and use them, in the appropriate way. Same thing with artificial intelligence.
Right. So if we were sort of, I guess, thinking at that practical level here, you're talking about building a shed, right? I mean, obviously we know that, you mentioned that AI is used for prediction, it's used for decision making and generating new information, which is that's always a very interesting idea. But I mean, in terms of everyday applications, where do you think, if you're an everyday client, where are you starting to see AI actually having an impact in your day-to-day life, and where are you starting to see it, where are you starting to see it in your real life?
Sure. Yeah. So that's a great question. Another common thing, along with the fact that people have this assumption that AI is the singular thing, there's also this common assumption that, they've heard of AI, but they don't think they're using it, or they don't think they could get value out of it. But most people are actually using some form of AI every day. And so there's a few common different types of AI tools that most people are probably using. And so one of the most common is actually, one of the most common types of AI tools is for prediction. So trying to predict something in the future. And so, some everyday examples of that would be if you were to use Google Maps or Waze. Those tools are trying to predict what traffic flows are going to be like, what's the best route to get you to where you want to go. So that's something that's probably very familiar for a lot of people. Other forms of prediction tools are things like if you use Spotify, you can see, hey, Spotify will suggest certain songs, or if you're using Netflix, it'll suggest certain shows or movies. So those are everyday applications where, people are probably using them from a prediction perspective. Other forms of AI tools that people are probably using, whether they are aware of it or not, are decision-making tools. So they might not necessarily be using them directly, but they're actually being applied against them. So decision-making tools are types of AI models that are trying to make a decision about something, so decide an outcome. And these are, we're seeing them being used from a financial services perspective to determine if somebody's going to get a loan or somebody gets a credit card. Those are, common everyday examples that are happening in the background that people might not be aware of. Probably the most well-known decision-making tool relates to self-driving cars. So if you see a Waymo going down the street, if you're in San Francisco or somewhere else where they are allowed to drive, there's decision-making algorithms making all kinds of decisions every second. Should it stop? Should it start? Should it slow down? Speed up? So that's another different type of AI use case or tool. And then we have generative AI, which is the ChatGPTs of the world. More and more people are using those for various reasons to find information, to help plan a birthday party or travel. And so that's another common type of AI tool that people are using every day. And then there's a few more just to kind of round it out. Computer vision is something that's probably a bit rarer for a lot of people, but it's a tool that is going to be available on your smartphone for a lot of people. If you have an Apple or an Android, you can take pictures of something, and sometimes Google will say, hey, would you like to learn more about this car, this plant, whatever your image is of? And a lot of people are starting to use tools that are a type of AI called natural language processing. And what those AI types of tools are doing is helping you do things like translate from English to French, or from, say, written language or common spoken language to computer code or other things. So that's multiple different kind of types of tools that are being used every day, and people are seeing a lot of value out of.
Right. And I mean, of course, it's always hard, with the translation, always harkens back to Star Trek, right? But
Yeah.
I think one question you're always going to ask is, in terms of things like computer vision or natural language processing, how mature are these technologies? Like, I noticed this interesting phenomenon where people who own Teslas completely trust the Tesla to drive, and people who don't own Teslas do not want to see a driverless car. So how mature really are these is this technology?
Yeah, I would say the maturity it's pretty good. So it's one of those situations where I think there's always benefit in being a bit skeptical, like we were saying at the beginning. So I think you can trust these pieces of software to deliver on what you want them to do, depending on what you're trying to attempt. So I don't know that I fully trust a fully autonomous vehicle, but in certain circumstances, like in Las Vegas, it'll take you from the airport to a hotel. In very controlled instances, I think it's mature enough that it would be fine. But in other instances, to kind of if I were to take that across country, I'd probably be less certain about the outcomes. And for things like natural language processing and computer vision, they're pretty good. But there is the opportunity or the possibility that they'll generate errors. So if I'm using computer vision and I take a low quality picture and I say, hey, what is the watch in this picture? There's a real probability, a real chance that it's going to get it wrong. If I take a higher quality image, there's a better chance that it's going to be right. But if I'm just trying to figure out what a watch is, the stakes are pretty low. But if I need to do that in kind of a high risk, highly regulated environment, I wouldn't want to solely rely on this computer vision model. And or if I was interacting with clients and I had to convey very important information, I don't know that I would just rely on a computer algorithm to do the translation from, say, English to French. I would want somebody who's a natural language speaker to actually be able to check that. So I guess just to summarize, it's pretty good. And I think that you can use it in a lot of different scenarios and get value out of it. But you really want to make sure that it really is going to depend on kind of the risk versus reward. If you're doing something that's like very important or is highly regulated, you're going to want to trust but verify the output.
Right. So exactly. Well, trust but verify, which always then brings me to sort of the business applications here of AI. And how ready do you? I mean, this is sort of looking at this from the perspective of a client or a client's children, or let's say the client, they're a little older here, the client's grandchildren. How ready are most businesses to actually start using these tools properly, respecting clients' data privacy, et cetera? Like, how really ready are we? Or are we just really too early to talk about that? Or is there groups of businesses that are better than others? Like, how is this sort of starting to filter through into the economy?
Yeah, in terms of businesses using AI tools to generate value for their customers, I think we're definitely there. I think kind of to the previous point, it really depends on the use case. So businesses have, for years now, almost since the origination of ChatGPT, back in 22, they've been starting to use these generative AI tools for certain kind of low-level administrative tasks. And those are, perfectly acceptable. They're low risk. And generally speaking, there's a human in the loop. And by that, I mean there's actually somebody that's going to verify the output after the AI tool has generated a response. So these tools represent a significant amount of value in helping to kind of increase efficiency within an organization. So I think most organizations are very comfortable in using the tools to do that. And when we're talking about organizations using AI tools, generally speaking, they have gone through the process of signing enterprise agreements, which have all types of stipulations about how the data can be used, whether the model can be trained on data, and gone through all these additional steps to make sure that their clients are protected, as well as the information being generated is accurate. So I think when we're talking about those types of applications, there's a high degree of comfort in using those types of tools to deliver value in that way. But as as time progresses, companies are exploring how to apply AI in more complicated and interactive ways. So doing more complex tasks, as well as potentially now starting to interact directly with clients. And I think where we are as it relates to that is we're kind of in a transitory period. So I think people are starting to get more comfortable with those types of applications, but we aren't fully there yet. It really depends on the type of organization that you're dealing with, where it's like if you're dealing with the Googles and the Metas of the world, they're at the bleeding edge. They're more comfortable taking risks as it's associated with adopting new technology. But if you're talking about financial services companies, they tend to be more conservative. They want to make sure that this new technology is as robust and safe and secure as possible before actually rolling it out to their customers. And so that's what we're seeing is that the tech companies are leading the way, and then certain institutions like financial services are adopting technology, but they're taking more of a cautious approach. So there's a whole spectrum of adoption. And what type of company we're talking about would determine kind of where they fall in that spectrum.
Right. So it's really what you're saying is this is going to come down a lot to industry specific requirements.
Yeah.
If you're Meta, you're Google, you're pick any of the hyperscalers, you're going to be on the bleeding edge of this because that is your business. However, if you're Wellington Altus or you're a bank, you're JP Morgan, you're just not. You're going to be making sure that you're going to be taking a lot more caution before you're going to be looking to deploy these types of technologies.
Yeah, absolutely. The regulatory environment is going to be one of the largest things, as it relates to an industry that's going to determine the rate of adoption and how these AI tools can actually be applied within that industry.
Absolutely. Well, we always want to make sure that we are protecting clients here, and I know that Fidelity's that's job number one there. Concern number one at Fidelity as well.
Yeah.
In terms of adoption, if you're thinking about adoption of AI by businesses or just interacting on a day-to-day basis, could you maybe just sort of expand on answer the question about what an AI agent is?
Sure.
And just talk about that for a few moments.
Yeah, happy to do so. So just to kind of make the distinction, so there's large language models like we're familiar with that are ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, pick your favorite. Those types of tools are more conversational. So you'll type in a request, it generates a response, and then you would type back and kind of iterate through until you get a deliverable that you like. And so that was kind of phase one of this AI adoption wave. The next version that we're seeing certain companies adopt are called AI agents. And what AI agents are is the next iteration of that kind of chat-like feature where these AI agents are really like digital workers. They have a lot more autonomy to actually execute on the task that you're asking them to do. So you can, instead of having to go back and forth in order to actually get, some information out of an AI chat, you say, hey, this is what I'm looking for. Here are the sources. go out, gather the information, make decisions about, how to format the output, and then bring it back to me. So there's a lot more autonomy in these AI agents than you would have having to kind of type in all of these requests in a chat-like feature for something like ChatGPT.
Right. So I'm just thinking about, again, practical application for clients. Like if they were to have a subscription, say Copilot or Claude or SuperGrok or any of the heavier models, how would they use an agent in day-to-day life to maybe simplify things for them?
Yeah, so the way that you can think about agents is if you're doing something consistently and repeatedly, you could build an agent to basically take over that task for you. So generally speaking, for agents, it's usually multi-step tasks. So if you find that you're kind of doing the same thing over and over each day, you could potentially create an agent, whether that's with ChatGPT or Copilot Studio or your other favorite tool. And the way that you would do that is you basically provide instructions for each step of that process. You would upload those into the agent, and then the agent would be able to execute on that for you. So an example would be if every morning you're getting up, you're doing a search about what's the latest current events, you're downloading that information, you're summarizing that information, and then you're creating an email template to send out to either people in your organization or externally. You could create an agent that does all of that for you. So then when you wake up in the morning, your news agent has done all of that work for you. Now all you have to do is just review it and then send it out. So that's one example of an agent and how you could go about creating one with Copilot or ChatGPT.
Right. Okay. So it'd be pretty broad. So if you were every morning you're looking up hockey scores, you could create an agent to summarize, hockey scores and maybe the highlights of each game in a simple, 1 to 2 page, output.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the interesting thing about agents is once you've created one, you can reuse that agent, and agents can actually work together. So you could have an agent, like you mentioned, that's going out and collecting all of the hockey scores from the previous night. And then you can have an agent for your fantasy hockey league. So then they work together to actually update your lineup for later that night. So you can actually create these teams of agents that are able to work together almost like a real team, but with very specific guardrails to make sure that they don't go off and do something that you wouldn't want them to do.
Right. So it's like a sort of a specialized task worker that you sort of put into a box, and as long as it stays in the box, it can kind of rattle around inside of the four walls. And it'll accomplish what you're looking for.
Yeah.
And sort of that idea. So okay, now we have these goal orientated sort of digital workers.
Yeah.
I always have to ask. We'll have to ask a question because it's natural that comes up. And saying like, what sort of professions are going to be under? Are going to have to change in light of this? And sort of a second part to this question is I wanted to run this idea by you. I heard, that to me makes sense, but I just want to, you're the expert. I want to ask this as an honest question. Is that, the idea that I heard came across is that if you're going to assess, how secure is a job in the AI world that's coming, right? You have to ask yourself: is the easy part of the job the automation, or is the hard part of the job the automation? And you would use an example of, say, a cab driver in London used to have to memorize all 25,000 streets, plus the traffic flow. Now my phone does that. Right now, what do you think of that frame, and sort of how do you think about sort of careers and job work going forward, right, in light of AI?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think in terms of what, to answer your question, which careers could be most vulnerable to something like the AI revolution that we're seeing in front of us. I think the ones that are probably most at risk are those roles or careers that are singularly focused on kind of just one thing. So if you think about very narrow roles that might be very specific to, say, copywriting or doing one particular task every day, there is a higher likelihood that it could be disrupted by an AI tool or some other piece of software that is able to replicate that individual task. And so those are the types of roles that I think are most at risk, but I think they would be at risk regardless of whether it was AI or something else that could potentially displace it. Most of us have very kind of complex jobs where we're doing several things throughout the day. So any one particular, if AI became really good at, let's say, writing emails, that's only one aspect of my job. There's a bunch of other things that I end up doing. So, if I don't write another email, I wouldn't be that sad, but I would still have a job. And so to your point about, how does this change maybe what future careers look like? I think what it does is because AI tools are getting so good at understanding common language and then creating things, I think by removing the technical barriers, say to creating an app, a website, a great design, what it's doing is it's rewarding creativity. So I think the people that are going to be most successful in the future, they won't necessarily need to have that technical background that used to be a requirement. They're going to be the people who are most creative in understanding how these tools work and how they can apply them to generate value. So, to the point of, the cab driver that had to remember all of those different streets, that's how they kind of, generated value for the customer. They could know a shortcut. Now your phone does it. Now it's more about, maybe the cab driver is a great conversationalist, or they have a nicer car, or there's some different aspect that really kind of attracts people to use their service. And the same thing I think is being unlocked with AI. Now it's not about being able to code a website. It's about being able to create products and services that are really going to resonate with kind of who your audience is.
Right. It almost sounds like, again, that you're talking about creative people are going to invent things, and that really comes down to the fact is that the jobs that people are going to go to don't even exist yet, but they will. Yeah. Just like, when we invented the cotton gin, we didn't, we're not dealing with the unemployment created by that 200 years later still.
Yeah, there's going to be a shift. So instead of people doing kind of all of the manual work, there'll be a shift into now people are kind of managing which tool to use and how to apply them. And so, yeah, we'll definitely see that structural shift in the same way that we saw it during the invention of the cotton gin, the Industrial Revolution. People moved from the farms into the factories. And now, with AI, to your point, people could move from kind of doing, frontline manual work to now they're actually managing teams of agents instead. So that structural shift will probably happen in certain areas, but that hasn't fully been determined yet.
All right. Well, that's an interesting perspective, and thank you for sharing that here, John. I know we are coming up to your allotted time, so we do want to respect that. Was there anything else, John, that you wanted to add into sort of the presentation or the conversation here that I haven't asked? Do you think it's important to bring up about artificial intelligence?
Yeah, I think I guess the one thing that I would add is I would encourage people to test it out. I know, some people are apprehensive about AI tools and they're not necessarily convinced of the value. I think the best way to really kind of, I guess, test for yourself is to go out and try to use these tools and get a better understanding of what they can and can't do, because then that'll go a long way in actually getting value out of the tools themselves. And I would just, pick your favorite, any of the major tools, whether it's Anthropic or OpenAI or Gemini, are good places to start. And then if you really want to kind of maximize your ROI in terms of using these tools, look into prompting. So prompting is how you give instructions to these tools. And the better that you prompt, the more you're going to get out of them. And the bigger, the help these AI tools are going to be. So I would just say, go out there, test it out, see what works for you, and then see how you can apply it in your everyday life.
All right. Well, that's a great note to end on here, John. So I'll just say, to all those listening, especially clients of the Kluge Wealth Advisor Group, if you have any questions on any of this, please reach out. We can always, John's been very generous in just saying, look, we can fire a question or two to him post podcast. Yeah. Here, but I think we'll just wrap things up and just thank John for his time. And it was really great to have this conversation, John. So hopefully we'll be able to maybe reconnect in the future. And it was great talking to you here today.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.